Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first event of the Adaptation Week, Climate Resilient Food Systems, Scaling Digital Services for Smallholder Farmers. I'll mention a little bit more about Adaptation Week at the end of this call, but there will be events going on throughout this week, and I encourage you all to check those out as well. My name is Tyler Ferdinand. I am a research associate with the World Resources Institute, who is a co-managing partner for the Global Commission on Adaptation. It would be great for those that are just finally joining that if you could change your name under the participants tab by clicking on more and adding your name and organization. Just to give a little etiquette for Zoom, next tab, Emma, please. To save on bandwidth, I'm asking if everyone can please put themselves on mute and keep their videos off, unless if they are on a panel or if they are speaking during the Q&A, which there will be a Q&A session at the end of each panel. To the right of that tab, you can find the participants list. This is where I've been saying that you can change your name. Also at the very bottom there, you should be able to find a blue hand in which you can raise your hand during the Q&A. Or if you have any technical problems, please raise your hand as well or enter it into the chat. To the right of the participants tab, chat, we'll be pushing out questions throughout the entirety of this session. We encourage you to respond to those questions, ask your own questions, and also during the Q&A sessions, please put your questions for Q&A there. And then finally, if you're feeling quite emotive, all the way to the right is the reactions tab. This is where you can like or dislike comments. And just to be clear, this is a recorded session. Please, if you don't want to be, are we all on mute? Great. If you don't want to be recorded, this is the time to let us know or leave. So could we press next, please, Emma? Great. So where are we? How are we doing? Currently, there are over 500 million smallholder farmers across the globe, producing about 60% of the world's food. Available climate impact models are estimating that global crop yields could drop by 30%, while food demand increases by 50% by 2050. If we continue on the current trajectory, the number of people affected by hunger will surpass 840 million by 2030, and we will not reach our goal of zero hunger. Next slide, Emma, please. Today, we'll be talking about digital climate advisory services or climate information tools or platforms that help individuals make climate resilient decisions and adapt to climate variability and change. Digital climate advisory services offer an opportunity to build the resilience of small-scale agricultural producers to the impacts of climate change and promote food security. In some cases, agricultural productivity and household income has increased by as much as 60% using such tools, especially those bundled with other services. The number of people who have access to mobile phones, one medium for these types of services, is greater than those who have access to basic sanitation services. The diversity and capacities of digital technologies are rapidly growing. The question is, how do we utilize these resources to empower individuals to build resilience to shocks and slow onset events? So some advisory services have demonstrated amazing adaptability and flexibility to bundle with other services that address new challenges and emerging issues such as COVID-19. And we'll have one of our panelists touch upon that today. Next slide, please. To make the most of these services, they need not only be scaled, but be designed and implemented through co-creation processes, be demand-driven, utilize high-quality validated data, include accountability mechanisms, and provide equitable benefits. As part of the Global Commission on Adaptation, in collaboration with IRI Colombia, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and World Food Program, as well as many other collaborating working group members, we have been co-developing an investment blueprint for digital climate advisory services. The vision of this blueprint is to expand the access of quality digital climate advisory services to help build the resilience of at least 300 million small-scale agricultural producers by 2030. The blueprint will include new landscape mapping, including finance flow mapping, a proposal of principles for good practice based on the principles for digital development, analysis of gaps and challenges related to these principles, and finally, recommendations for investment based on the analysis of costs and returns on investment. Next slide, please. The objectives of this webinar are going to be threefold. One, we would like to reconvene and amplify some of the voices that participated in the co-creation process for the investment blueprint for digital climate advisory services. The second objective is to share the latest thinking from those that are working in this space in terms of what are the opportunities that lay before us and challenges, and what is the current global demand for such services, and that will be the theme of panel 1. And then finally, exchange ideas on what are the key ingredients for expanding the reach, equity, and sustainability of these services, and that will be the theme of panel 2. You can see to the right here that the basic agenda, we're going to be flip-flopping between Mentimeter questions, rapid-fire panels, and then panel Q&As. Next slide, please, Emma. So without further ado, I would like to now introduce my colleague, Claude Magisha. He will be running the Mentimeter questions throughout the session. Claude is the Global Center on Adaptation Senior Program Officer for Food Security and Digital Advisory Services, and he is one of the collaborating members for the Blueprint. Claude, with our first question, please.
Thanks, Tyler. Hi, everyone. Just to keep this interactive, we thought of actually using the Mentimeter to ask questions to all the participants. If you go to the chat box, you should be able to see the link to click, or even on the screen, actually it's there. You just need to click or type in your URL, the mentioned link and the code. And then, we want you to respond to the question on the screen. There are a couple of options there. And as you respond to those, they will appear on the screen. And here the idea really is to get a sense of who is part of the webinar, but also to kind of make sure that, we do not leave anyone behind, but we actually, speak to all the actors. So if you could please do it quickly so that we get a sense of who is on the call. And then as we go on, there are a couple of other questions in between panels, just to make sure that we keep it interactive and that, we get a sense of who is on and what they think. Yeah, I can see it coming. NGO is we have, I think, 10 people from NGO. Corporate service provider also is picking up. Looks like there's no farmer as of now. No extension worker, critical actors. As we talk about digital advisory, it looks like we don't have any as of now. No one from the Met office. So it looks like it's primarily NGO and corporate service providers. We'll be curious to know who do we have in other. Looks like also we have a number of participants. Yeah, so I think this is really helpful. It allows us to get a sense of who is on the webinar, but also to help really know, classifying the views or question we'll be able to get throughout the sessions.
Great, thanks, Claude.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for voting. Yeah.
Thank you, Claude. So we currently have 158 people on the call, and I see that the answer responses are quite below that. So feel free to keep on answering. But for now, we're going to transition to the first panel. I would like to introduce Katusha. Katusha Farah is the World Food Programme Senior Climate Change and Disaster Risk Reduction Advisor in the Asia Pacific and coordinates World Food Programme's climate service initiatives in different countries. She has been leading the Investment Blueprints Working Group on Equity. Over to you, Katusha.
Thank you, Tyler, and thank you everyone for joining us. The first panel will really look and try and discuss and unpack a little bit more what are the opportunities when it comes to really looking at expanding the reach for digital climate advisory services, and at the same time, what are the needs when we expand and we when scale up, when we need to take into account issues that are linked to equity, to sustainability, but also how can we use these services to build resilience at the local level. I have 5 panelists that are going to join us this evening, and I have a round of questions, one for each one, and then I will open the floor to everyone for questions. So I'm not going to take questions just after the first intervention, but please write them down because I'm going to open up for inputs and questions afterwards. I will start immediately because we are a little bit short on time, and I'm going to start with John Mondi. And can I ask all the panelists also to put their videos on? Everybody else to please turn the videos off. John, when I was looking at your bio, I realized you are wearing many hats, and I'm even more pleased that you were able to make it. So you are at the moment you are having the role of emergency manager for the desert locust and COVID-19 response, but you're also leading the digital climate smart agriculture lead for Mercy Corps. And just in case you were going to be a bit bored, I think you're also Tanzania country. You're leading a Tanzania country program. Is that correct with Mercy Corps?
Yes, that is correct. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Okay, I feel lots of empathy. I'm also wearing many hats. So I have a question for you. And in your view, while climate information services are rapidly growing and scaling, there remain an inclusion gap, if you want, for smallholder farmers when it comes to smallholder farmers. So we see on the one side a growth and proliferation, but then, we're still struggling to reach the last mile. Can you tell us a little bit more how does Mercy Corp and particularly Agrofin address the information needs of these smallholders? What do you put in place? What do you do to reach the last mile?
Thank you so much, Katisha. Yes, as you mentioned, Mercy Corp Agrofin works on digital financial and digital information services for smallholder farmers. And I think to begin to answer your question about the inclusion gap, it's good to recognize that digital services for smallholder farmers it's still a very nascent industry, and digital climate smart agriculture within that is also very even more so nascent than perhaps the digital sector as a whole in agriculture. So while there is an inclusion gap, I think it's still early days, and that growth could mean the growth in our sector could mean that we will see a narrowing of that gap. But the way that Agrofin works is we work with partnerships in the financial, private sector and public sectors. And we look at bundling services for smallholder farmers. And what that means is farmers within the digital ecosystem can access a range of services that meet their needs, whether it's information, finance, inputs, markets, etc. And as many of the people on this panel and webinar will recognize, farmers have complex needs that are interrelated and across the value chain. And so you can't really, within climate change as an issue or within financial inclusion or any of these other themes, tackle any one issue on its own. And I think that is one way we look at narrowing the inclusion gap. The other way I think is important to note within the context of COVID-19 and desert locust that I'm managing at the moment, and climate change certainly has a lot of these emergency contexts related to it, slow or fast moving emergencies. They're all emergencies nonetheless. We found that A lot of farmers are hungry for information digitally. Over 60% of farmers surveyed in Kenya during our COVID-19 response have said they would like more information and about a whole range of topics, not just the public health crisis of COVID-19, for example. And so we see that there is still a gap of information that farmers are hungry for. And then thirdly, I would just like to mention that we are often taking a singular digital approach. And what I mean by that is sometimes you'll see organizations only deploy an SMS messaging campaign or only deploy a TV advertising campaign about a specific issue. However, one of the things that we've seen during our recent emergency response is that a combined set of digital channels can reach more farmers because probably it may seem obvious, but some farmers will have a television and not have a mobile phone. Other farmers will have a feature phone rather than a smartphone. And there is a growing number of farmers with a smartphone where you could use WhatsApp, for example, instead of SMS. But we found with these sorts of interrelated emergencies and crises, and if you're talking about drought or flooding or rapid pest and disease infestation, you need to respond across multiple channels to help include as many farmers as possible. And I think that's probably the best way to tackle some of these inclusion gaps within the climate services industry as well.
Thank you so much. And I think before I move, I think it's not easy. What I'm getting from you, it's not easy. There is a complexity into it that needs to be appreciated along the value chain of communicating the information. And also there is a tendency that we should really move away from a one channel to a more, let's say, a more integrated approach in how we communicate different types of information to meet different needs. As a small summary.
That's exactly right. And I would just say within the context of digital climate smart agriculture, we know that every context is different. And so we have to have responsive channels and responsive design to each different climatic context as well as farmer context. And while digital offers a great opportunity to do that and a feedback loop to the farmer, it also has to be noted in however you deploy it and with your bundling of partnerships and services.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So my next speaker is Hassan Gombe. Hassan, if you can put your video on and if your mic on, I will be able to see you. Hassan works with the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA, as a resilience officer. Welcome. And something I didn't say before is also that it's so nice to have on the panel, but also to see connected so many organizations that have worked with us in the development of the blueprint. A big thank you to you all because your contribution was fantastic, really. Hello, Hassan, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Hassan, when I looked at the Agra Resilience Agenda, I mean, it includes gender mainstreaming, which is a key element when we look at reach and equity, both gender mainstreaming and capacity building. In your opinion, and with your experience working with AGRA, how do you see the role that digital climate-informed advisory services have in promoting gender equity? But also at the same time, what do you see as the main challenges that we have when we try to reach those which are most marginalized, under-resources, living in more remote areas?
Great question, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to everyone about this. Just as a way of starting, John just said, on the complexity of smallholder farmer environment. When AGRA or when we seek to build resilience of farming systems, we're looking at a whole inclusive kind of playing field with multiple players ranging from the private sector all the way to the public sector. So it's really key that as we work with farmers, we're also looking at issues of strengthening the rural economy and making sure that policies and institutions that work with farmers are also strengthened to be able to respond to the needs of farmers. And that said, our major issue really is to make sure that we connect farmers to the information and technologies that exist. So building that last mile delivery system, as we call it in our organization, is really, really key. Bearing in mind that in Africa, where we work, farmers are really sparsely populated, and also their own capacities are very limited to uptake the technologies that we promote and the linkages with private sector. And this is where our work around digital technologies come in. We use digital technologies to reach farmers in the remotest areas. The fact that the mobile phone, as mentioned earlier, has penetrated quite significantly on the continent, that provides a platform for us to be able to share information, etc. Radio still remains a key tool to reach farmers, and this is something that we still want to build on. But as I mentioned earlier on, key for us is building this last mile delivery system. I also do need to mention that we're not trying to replace the conventional way or the face-to-face, the extension systems that we have. We're trying to enhance the system with the digital technologies that exist. We have tried to bring in what we call the village-based advisor model of extension, where communities themselves select select extension workers, and we connect these to private sector, and they work in conjunction with private sector and public extension to get to the farm. The digital technologies just work to kind of enhance this connectivity, and also for them to help them reach more farmers than usual. That said, I must say that we still have challenges to try and get the message through, to try and get the technologies adopted, because generally there's a lack of or limited capacities from the farmers to use digital technology. And therefore, to get people up to speed, that the phone can be used a little bit more than just a communication tool as usual for text and etc., is something that's slowly catching on. The other challenge still remains is that the adoption rates are still not that great, but we are working towards that. I think technologies do take time before they take the root. So a mixture of interventions, face-to-face, conventional extension, version extension together with the digital technologies is something that we're key on building on. Thank you, Katisha.
Thank you so much. And I think again, a lot of what you both said so far resonates with me. And I think what I see is that it takes time to reach everyone, to make sure that the system works. It really takes time and investment. The second one is that in the approach is important to enhance what's already existing, like extension services, rather than duplicating or cutting them off. So build on what is already there. And then I think the importance of understanding that there is limited capacity of those who need the information the most. So there is that need to invest in building those capacities so that they can access and use technology. So this is what I'm thinking. There is a lot more, but let me progress to the next speaker. Thanks so much. Our next speaker is Alison Rose. Alison is based at the International Research Institute for Climate and Society at the Columbia University, where she works as a science officer for the CGIAR program on climate change, agriculture, and food security, known as CCAFS. And I'm sure many of you have been working or know the work that CCAFS does in the field. Welcome, Alison.
Hi.
Hi. I still don't see you, but let's see. Is your video on?
Yes, it is on.
Okay,
So,
good. Yes, there you are.
okay.
Welcome. Alison, so Alison, you were part of the development of the blueprint, and actually IRI was leading the investment blueprint working group on data quality and assurance. Could you share with everyone, give us a little bit more background on who participated in the working group, and also what, in your opinion, were some of the most surprising findings, something that you didn't expect would come out and actually it emerged from consultations?
Great. Yeah, thanks. That is correct. So I, with my colleague Steve Zibiak, led the working group on data and governance. And I see many of our working group members are on the webinar today. So I just wanted to welcome and thank them as well. So we had about 25 people in our working group, and they really represented a wide range of stakeholders. We really wanted that kind of multi-stakeholder approach to our working group to really get all the different perspectives and opinions and that rich experience. We had NGOs, AGRA was represented, and we had people from the research and academic communities, University of Reading, Makerere University, the CJR Big Data Platform. We had international organizations like the World Bank, FAO. We had the WMO, UK Met, Gates Foundation. So it really, we really felt like we were getting that range of perspectives and also a geographic diversity, which we also felt was important. So we had, we met every couple weeks over a several month period. So we really had an opportunity to have some really rich conversations around the critical issues for our working group. And it was a really interesting intellectual exercise. So it's a good question. What's most surprising? I think what was really interesting to my colleague and I, as we were kind of thinking back to it, is there was such a wide range of consensus. We thought that this would be a process where we're going to kind of have to, we'd have a lot of difference of opinion, and we'd, kind of not argue, but discuss it out to come to, some consensus. But that really wasn't the case. There just really was, there seemed to be a, agreement on what the critical issues were. So that was really interesting, especially with such a diverse group. And the other thing I would say is that it was really interesting to us that there was really the need for co-production. That was really came out as something that everyone valued. And it was just surprising because I don't think that, that's not something that has been so widely embraced, maybe, in the last decade or something. You probably wouldn't have seen such a agreement on that. And I think everyone kind of echoed that it, the need for critical input from all users and how important co-production is. And just some of that has already been echoed by the John Mundi and Asan in their comments. And we really found that came out in our working group as well. So I think those were probably our most surprising findings through the process.
So I was expecting something controversial, but actually it was quite good.
Yeah,
we were kind of expecting
something controversial as well, but it really didn't happen.
No, that's excellent. And I think the aspect of co-production actually came out very strongly also in our working group on equity. It was one of the main outcomes. And I think, as you said, the development of the blueprint also provided us with an opportunity to work with so many different organizations and really combine different experiences. Thank you. Thank you for that, Alison.
Thanks. And yeah, it was, thanks to everyone who participated, who are here today.
Thank you. My next speaker is Chandrakant. If you put your video on and your mic. Hi, welcome. Chandrakant works with the Crop In as the business operation lead for both the Africa and the Middle East regions, and it's great to have you here. I'd like to learn a little bit more about Crop In. I mean, I saw that it's been a very successful service. It has gained praise as the best farm innovation from the year from Agriculture Tech Breakthrough Solution Award. So it is well known. Could you tell us a little bit more, though, how climate information is integrated into Crop-In services and how it adds value? And if you have time, something on how you see it helping equity as well. It's a big question, so let's see how you do.
Perfect. Thank you. I'll try to answer as much as possible in a very, very crisp manner and a very short time. Firstly, thank you so much for hosting this amazing webinar and also providing this opportunity for us to talk. To give you a quick heads up about Cropin, we are an ag tech company based back in India, providing technology solutions to agri companies across the world. We are in this space from past 10 years, and we collaborate with organizations in the names of like Agra, Mercy Corps, and deploy programs and technology to farmers across geographies. So let me start with what is climate change and how this will affect agriculture and how technology can play a major role in it, right? So for example, the climate change is real, right? So the adverse climate change is a threat to sustainable farming. It not only leads to bad harvest, but also leads to soil degradation, a drop in the yield, your quality of products and produces comes down drastically, and also helps and reduces the harvest quality, what you're looking for. And also it increases the incidences of your attacks of pests and diseases, right? So also according to the latest reports, what I was going through is that 9% of your agriculture yield will come down if we don't focus on your climate resilient agriculture practices, right? So to counter this and to provide best practices and advise farmers across geographies, we as an organization deploy our technology tools to organizations and programs across the world. So we focus on 5 major things. That is number 1 being your climate smart advisory module, weather forecast condition, weather-based advisory services, and also inputs and technical advices to the farmers and the field officers as well, right? So how this fundamentally works is this climate smart advisory model, what Cropin has developed over the years, is a season-wise, crop-wise configuration communication sent to the farmers, right? So to give you an example, there's maize growing in Kenya, right? During this crop life cycle of maize, the 30th day of sowing, the temperature should be below 25 degrees centigrade, or this crop is going to be affected by pests and diseases, right? So this system of ours automatically triggers an SMS or as an alert to the farmer saying, hey farmer, this is the 30th day of your sowing, this is the temperature, please use chemicals and fertilizers to protect your crops or do other methods of protection of your crops as well, right? So this is one of the ways of how we channelize communication as a smart advisory module, where we trigger this automation through the weather forecast condition, customize it to the type of crops, and then channelize communications to the farmers across geographies, right? Apart from that, we also look at the weather forecast condition to 7 to 14 days and send alerts to the farmers saying, hey, this is the temperature, how it's going to look like. It could be your temperature, humidity, and rainfall. So based on this advice services and forecast, you can definitely plan your irrigations, you can definitely plan your chemical usages, fertilizer usage, and etc., and protect your crops and get the right harvest what you're looking for, right? So that is the second aspect what Cropin as a technology will come into picture and support farmers and organizations across the globe. Apart from that, we also help you in planning your what do you say, it could be floods, it could be your devastations through your land clogging through waters and things like that, where automation of weather forecast conditions will be channelized as a communications to the farmer, right? One of the best examples what I could give you is the program with Mercy Corps, what you're doing, because I could see John here as well, is with an organization in Kenya, where we have categorically focused 50,000 farmers and sending out them advisory modules based on provinces, crops, and weather conditions, so that they can protect the crops and channelize communications accordingly, right? So I believe we as a partner will provide technology and channelize communications to farmers across geographies.
Thank you. So Chandra, if there is one thing that I'm gathering and I can take from your presentation, is this need to really have tailored advice. Mm-hmm. So to make sure that we look, that we look at the specific crops and weather, and really tailored to support decision making, which is one of the core objectives in a way of climate services in general, but also of climate informed digital advisories.
Absolutely. All those communications and as well as alerts or advisory services are channelized based on the conditions on the ground, based on the number of crops, the location, and as well as the weather forecast conditions. So all these three factors gets combined, and we channelize the communications to the farmers as an alert, advisory services, or an input change to the farmer itself, right? So this
Thank
is a
you.
data
Yeah.
communication which will be channelized.
Thank you. I have plenty of questions, but no time. And I see that a lot of questions are coming in. So I will thank you for now and go to our last speaker, which is David Bergvinsson. David, if you could put, yes, your mic and your video on. So I will see you and welcome to the panel. David joined AWARE as Chief Science Officer in February 2019. And I really liked in your bio, you said that with a view to accelerate innovation and reach in a way and access to premium weather data. I found that very interesting as a focus in joining a new position. So welcome to the panel, David. Can you tell us a little bit more about AWARE? So AWARE has a very diverse and very rich partnership from what I understand. And in this case, what can you share with the panel in terms of what lessons as AWARE have you learned in terms of what are the different roles of both private and the public sector in advisory services partnerships, so across the value chain in delivering advisory services? And perhaps if I can add also with a view to sustainability, could you share a bit of some of those lessons with us today?
Great. Well, thank you, for this opportunity, and welcome to everyone participating in this timely webinar. Really, what we're looking at how do we empower farmers to realize their full potential, and to do that, as pointed out, it's a complex challenge, and that requires diverse contributions of different partners in that endeavor. And so, starting with the public sector. We obviously have the Ministry of Agriculture, and under that we have national research departments as well as extension services. Quite often in these countries, the National Met Department is underneath the Ministry of Agriculture. That's another key partner in this development of solutions. But then we also have the Ministry of Finance, and especially as we look at financial services and the regulations to support their successful implementation, especially for smallholder farmers. As pointed out, it's a real challenge and context specific around connectivity. So that brings in the Ministry of Telecommunications as well, making sure that infrastructure is in place to deliver these services. Those are just some examples of the public sector, but then the private sector has a lot to offer, especially as we look to the delivery of these services. And so that includes, of course, the input providers that has been mentioned already play a key role, but also financial services, so banking institutions or mobile network operators, really important, quite often not considered in the early stages of design, but a key stakeholder in this, as well as radio. And so depending on the spectrum in which a farmer finds himself, having access to a smartphone, feature phone, or no phone at all, we have to look at different channels and the private sector partners to deliver that. And then, we get into an organization like AWARE, where we provide premium weather data around the world. So we generate 1.9 million weather stations around the world that serves a wide range of countries, that not only in providing the weather data, but also the analytics to understand how the weather has actually changed, and then what farmers can do to respond to that. So your question around sustainability, it's looking at sustainability of the farmer, because if they're not in business, none of these other services will have a demand. But also sustainability of the partners financially. And so we offer a range of services, not only in the provision of data, but the analytics, the decision trees that take into account the time of planting, the crop that was planted, the location where it was planted, and priorities of the farmer to then deliver tailored messages, just as Crop-In has highlighted. And so, at the end of the day, though, all of this comes down to implementation and execution. And how do we accelerate that whole process? These webinars are great in exchanging ideas, but I think one of our key challenges is actually execution. How do we make this really happen on the ground at scale? Not on a pilot of 1,000 farmers, but millions of farmers. And herein lies, I think, the great opportunity to be bold and to really change the way we think about scaling innovation. And at Aware, that's exactly what we're looking at. How do we work with this wide range of partners? Often, you know, it's challenging to coordinate across a large number of partners to implement programs, but it's critical for success and sustainability.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think, again, you touched on very important points, I think, for everyone. One is that the theme of partnership, it is not one organization jobs. It takes more than one, because it's a very complex value chains, and different actors have different role to play, different piece of the puzzle. I think the importance of moving away from pilots, and especially from successful pilots, to really then bring what we learn and the experience to scale. And also the fact that, again, is that it is important to consider everyone when we talked before about the co-production, from the real onset, from the early stages of design, including some of the ICT providers. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to move to the questions, because I think we have several questions. Let's see. Thank you, John, for having answered already. So let me start to pick some. I will pick some, and I have one for Aware from Oliver. I'm going to read 3 or 4, and then hand over to you. So for you, David, from Oliver from ICPAC. Have you undertaken a validation of 1.9 million station data rainfall? So very quick answer on that one. I will come back to you. That was the question. Let's see, from the University of Reading, Graham, to Chandra. The question is whether your example suggested you provide quite specific advice to farmers based on forecast. How do you ensure those forecasts are location specific and accurate, and how do you communicate the uncertainty of forecasts to farmers? So if you can think about that, Chandra, I'm going to come back to you. Also another question for you. How do you ensure you're giving the correct advice? So if you could also perhaps answer that, Chandra. A question for everyone, and perhaps I'd like to bring this question to John and Hassan. How can digital climate informed advisories incorporate alternative forms of knowledge and traditional knowledge? That's really interesting. So John and Hassan, if you don't mind just keeping this in mind. I'm not going to take it all question for now. I'm just looking for one for Alison. Alison, I'd like you to think about who's currently being left out of co-creation, co-production processes, in your view or experience, who is most at risk of being left out. I'll stop for now. I think I have a question for everyone, and I ask you to please be very brief in your answers. David, over to you.
Great. Yeah, we get this question all the time, is the accuracy of our weather data. And so we've actually addressed that by doing least mean squares error or statistical analysis of ground stations with our weather data and the weather data of alternative sources such as IBM in the private sector or NASA Power Grid in the public sector. And I'm pleased to say that we've come out ahead in all regions, especially for rainfall, because for rain-fed agriculture, clearly this is the most important parameter. And so we're outperforming alternate sources. There's no perfect source of data because you're trying to cover an entire world. And so we use a gridded approach to do that. And so depending on where your farm is located relative to the center of that weather station, but no farmer is more than 6.5 kilometers from any one of our weather stations around the world. So accuracy, very important. And yes, we've looked into it, and yes, we perform well.
Thank you so much. Chandra, the next question was for you from Graham, from University of Reading.
Yeah, thanks. So Graham, thanks for these questions. Let me answer it very quickly. We provide weather conditions, weather forecast conditions for the range of between 500 meters by 500 meters. So the plots which are different on a distance wise, we will be accurate enough to provide the exact weather conditions to having the 500 meter by 500 meter feasibility of getting these weather conditions. And these weather conditions are also channelized as an SMS, as a voice clip to the farmers. And we also have a farmer application as well, where he can get this SMS or a communication or advice services. That's number one. The second question is also about how we will be providing exact and accurate advisory services based on the pest and the threshold levels on the ground level. To answer that, we have an application, which is also a flagship product of Croppin on a smart farm, where your field officers on a regular basis capture the data on the ground. These data sets which get captured on the ground will be processed back into our systems. And based on the reality on the ground, we will analyze and provide the analytics and results out of it, right? So the sets are being captured on the system, and we process them and share the communications to the farmer as an SMS or voice clip.
Thank you. I have so many questions. I'm going to keep quiet now. Over to John and Hassan, and the question was, how can we incorporate alternative forms of knowledge?
Hassan, would you like to go first?
Okay, thanks a lot, John. Just to answer that question, first, I'd like to also recognize questions that have been posed by Ali Hamza, Luciana, Peter King, Jim, and Emily. All these are, I'm going to try and touch on them. Brilliant questions. With regard to the issue of alternative information capturing, from where we work, mostly that is the traditional kind of knowledge that farmers have, and how we code that information and make it useful just beyond a particular community. One thing that ICTs have brought into our work is a channel for information, not only from sources such as MET, extension services, but also vice versa. We're able to capture views of farmers on practices, for example, on things like weeding, what type of traditional practices farmers use for weeding, what type in post-harvest storage, etc. These are really important for us because as we design our interventions, we try as much as possible to make them contextual. So this information is really key. And having that channel through ICT is really, really important. This is one way that we're capturing alternative sources of information and coding it into knowledge and taking it beyond specific geographies. I think one thing that is clear, one thing that's really been useful, as I mentioned earlier, is post-harvest storage and also the usage of water efficiency and etc. Touching on other issues on how we build incentives for building capacities for extension workers. Incentive is really key for our extension model because it's private sector based, which is also mixed with some public sector, and therefore having some sort of livelihood incentive built into the ICT use is something that we find is causing kind of higher adoption rates, etc. And yes, we do have a strong link between urban and rural, and ICTs play a role, particularly when it comes to markets and pricing. So let me stop here for now, and maybe John can answer the rest.
Thank you. I see you got 3 answers with 1 question. Well done.
That's
John,
why
over to you.
Hassan was better to go first in that case. But thank you very much. I think I won't go on for too long, I promise. But I think on the alternative information issue, it's quite interesting from a climate change advisory perspective, because actually many farmers in Africa are growing non-native crops like maize, which are actually, not necessarily resilient in some contexts within Africa for food security in wake of drought and deluge issues. So I think, funny enough, a lot of climate advisory is recommending that farmers do go back to some more traditional cropping systems and methods of management. Where it's also interesting is, I think digital provides a really good avenue for new advice that many farmers may not be aware of already. So to some extent, it isn't reinforcing those messages. But my final point on kind of how you integrate with more traditional forms of farming is that most of these digital products and services should be designed from a kind of a human-centered design product development principle, and that also helps to ensure that traditional knowledge is retained in the system.
Thank you so much. Over to Alison.
Yeah, hi, thanks. That's a great question, Katusha. And, I think it's, for our working group, and I'm sure for most of the colleagues here on the panel, the most critical voice is the farmers and the communities that are using the information services. And I think that's come out a lot in our working group, and also just in our discussions here. I think
you have to wake up early.
Please everyone on mute if you're not speaking. Can you, yes, please go on mute. Thank you.
So yeah, I think, and that again came out in our discussions around the importance of co-production and participatory methods that are used in a lot of these services. And also, just to make a point, another thing that came out in our working group, which I think is an effort to make sure that critical voice is heard, is the importance of monitoring and evaluation for digital advisory services that is involving users in M&E systems that allow that voice to be heard and that kind of continuous learning that we really need.
Thank you. We have run out of time. Thank you for the fantastic questions. What we can do is to share the question for the speakers and ask them to give you feedback. I think that would be the best way forward. Thanks again for joining us for this panel, to all the speakers. And I am handing over to Tyler, I think.
Yes, thank you, Katusha. That was wonderful, and thank you all panelists. I have a lot of comments on that, but I'll save some of that for the end, actually. I would like to turn this back over to Claude. And Claude, if you could post another Mentimeter question, that'd be great. And we're just going to do one of the two to save a bit on time. Over to you, Claude.
Yes, yeah, thanks, Tyler. And I'll also say thanks to the panelists for a great panel, and thanks to Katusha as well. So as we did for the first one, same process, I would want to hear from you after such an interesting panel, what you view as, opportunities to expand on digital advisory services, those that are inclusive, those that actually help all the actors involved across different value chains. Just speaking of some of the questions you've raised, but also some of the work that is going on, would want to hear from you to make sure that we capture your input in, let's say, the upcoming blueprint, which will be published very soon. So it'd be good to hear from you different views and opinions just quickly before we move to the next panel. What are the opportunities? We've talked about, panelists touched about opportunity of using digital, the opportunity to scale quickly, but also there are some, risks of, let's say, leaving some behind, risk about connectivity, affordability, inclusion. So I think it would be good to, hear from different, participants just quickly. Interesting responses. Am I able to scroll the screen just slowly so that people see quickly? Yeah, costs. Type of devices, data. Interesting question, which Alison spoke to earlier. Yeah, collaboration again. Yeah. Partnerships again. ICT, rural areas, rural connectivities, women inclusion. Yeah, nascent technologies, AI, machine learning. These are quite good. So if you could add a few more, and I'm sure all this will be captured and shared with all the participants so that you get a sense of. Yeah, do you want to scroll again? Yeah. Yeah, local actors. Yeah, data integration and systems integration, another great one. Yeah, tailored content. I think this was touched upon by the panelists. Yeah, I think overall that's it. Over to you, Tyler, for the next panel. This will be circulated widely after the webinar. Thanks.
Yeah, great, Claude. Thank you. Yes, we are going to save those answers, and we can circulate that. A lot of thoughtful and rich answers there. And I did notice somebody had put something related to having a consensus on a vision as well as principles and standards. And that's one of the main things that the investment blueprint tries to touch upon. So moving ahead, I would like to introduce Nicoletta Pavese, who will be moderating the second panel. Nicoletta is the Soft Commodities Forum Manager for the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. She, as well as other colleagues from the World Business Council, have been leading the Investment Blueprints Working Group on Sustainable Business Models. Over to you, Nicoletta.
Thank you so much, Tyler, and thank you, Katiush, and all of our speakers and panelists so far. It's been a very interesting conversation. We will now focus on what are the critical challenges and opportunity to scale digital climate-informed advisory services. So we will move on to the issue of scalability and financial sustainability, which is also the focus of our working group 3 in the development of the investment blueprint. I'll do my best to give a quick introduction to our following panelists, whose combined experience in this space will probably take a full day to unpack. So I'll do my very best to give you an introduction. And before I begin, I'd also like to remind everybody to use the chat function. I see that you're very actively using it to ask questions. And please do let us know if you have questions for specific panelists. If we move on to the next slide, we'll have a quick overview of our speakers. Like in the previous panel, I will quickly introduce each of them and give them a few minutes to answer specific questions. And we'll have a Q&A at the end. So thank you so much to our panelists for panel number 2. It's great to have you on board. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Stuart Collis. Stuart is a Senior Program Officer for Digital Agricultural Solution at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He has over 20 years of experience in agricultural information technology, and he was also a co-founder of Aware that we recently heard from. So thank you so much and welcome to the panel. Stuart, if you could open your camera and unmute yourself. It would be really great to hear from you in a few minutes based on your view of the current landscape. What are the investments that you think are needed to bring digital advisory services to scale in a way that addresses productivity increases, but also farmer resilience to climate shocks?
Yeah, thank you, Nicoletta. And thanks to all the previous panelists and participants. Great to be here and bring this community together. Just a little background on our strategy at the Gates Foundation. We focus on country-led inclusive agricultural transformation, increasing productivity, incomes, improving nutrition, empowering women. And we see digital as being an accelerator of that agricultural transformation process. We focus on areas around agriculture advisory, soil health and agronomy, inclusive finance and insurance, market linkages, smart farming, a lot of the topics that have come up during this working group on the climate adaptation services. And when we think about solutions at scale, as has been previously mentioned, a lot of the solutions on the market have yet to reach significant scale or anywhere near the scale that we need to reach. CTA reported that only 13% of farmers have registered for a digital solution in sub-Saharan Africa, and even fewer are active. Although we're seeing a lot of increase in adoption due to COVID and people relying more and more on digital services. I mean, in terms of climate adaptation, farmers not only don't have access to appropriate digital tools and services, but especially those that are informed by information that sort of enables those services to be climate informed and enable farmers to adapt to a changing climate and greater risk and vulnerability. So one way to think about this, or one way we look at it, is at 3 different levels. So you're thinking about it at the farmer level. We're talking about small scale producers, but we do recognize that we're really talking about the broader value chain as well. So extension agents was previously mentioned, but credit insurance providers, input suppliers, off takers, so forth. And if we're going to increase the equitable access to relevant information, products and services, how do we do that? Well, one way is through appropriately designed tools, using human-centered design, making sure these tools are trusted and accessible and affordable. Looking at things like voice technology, for example, are new ways in which those tools can be made more relevant and accessible. We're making some investments in this space around voice technology and AI-enabled text to speech and speech to text systems as an example. The next level, at the ecosystem level, if we think about the broader context and the landscape of players out there, many people on this call involved in this emerging industry, how do those services reach scale? When you look at a lot of the sort of services that people are providing across low middle income countries, one of the challenges is that the sort of stack required to build upon is not there. And so you think about in high income countries, you have a very strong public information and data available, such as soil maps and localized weather data, accurate forecasts. These types of information are there and available to innovate on top of. So I think some investments in those spaces are required. Also coordination between different actors. We talked about partnerships a little bit. We have some investments with one of the earlier speakers, Mercy Corps Agrifin Digital Farmer, to help enable the business models that those service providers are working with. And then finally, I would say at the macro level, looking at policies, regulations to enable private sector activity, data sharing to take place. We have some investments in fair data principles around this. But I would say, most importantly and relevant to this group is partnerships. These are enormous problems and challenges, and I don't think any one solution or service is going to solve it. It really takes a coordinated approach. So really appreciate being here and being part of this this group. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stuart. A lot of elements there, but I noted down the need for a human-centered approach in the design, the affordability and the access that links back really well with what discussed in the previous panel, as well as perhaps a new element, how do we make effective partnership, be it public-private, private-private, or multi-stakeholder partnership to enable these items. So thank you very much, and please note your question for Stuart in the chat or for later when we open the Q&A. Our second panelist I'd like to introduce is Astrid Svetterøs. She's the Senior Advisor at the Norwegian Agency for Development Assistance. Astrid's area of expertise is on food security, climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, and she also co-leads the community of practice on digital public goods for climate change adaptation under the Digital Public Goods Alliance. Thank you so much for being with us, Astrid, and if I can ask you to have your camera on, if you don't yet, that would be great. Thanks for being here. And I know that NORAD has just embarked on a new partnership with the Digital Public Goods Alliance. And I was wondering whether you could tell us a little bit more about this alliance, how it can be leveraged, do you think, to scale these kind of services?
Thank you so much, and thank you for this great opportunity to present the Digital Public Goods Alliance and our work to promote digital public goods for climate change adaptation. When I walked my kids to school this morning, I was checking my phone to see if it was going to rain. And the weather app that I use is YR, which is developed by Met Norway and is paid by Norwegian taxpayers. And I'm telling you this because the interesting thing about YR is that although it was initially developed as a service to people in Norway and Norwegians abroad, Met Norway now realized that it's increasingly being used by people all over the world, also by farmers in African countries. And this is because the app is free of charge, easy to use, and that the weather forecast is of high quality globally. The data has an open source and an open license, meaning that it can be a resource for national Met services when developing their own services. It therefore checks a lot of boxes in terms of being a digital public good, because the digital public good is open software, open data, open AI models, open standards, and open content. The Digital Public Goods Alliance is a multi-stakeholder initiative which is chaired by UNICEF and NORAD. It was established as a follow-up of the recommendations from the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on digital cooperation in 2018. In its report, it is recommended that a broad multi-stakeholder alliance involving the UN create a platform for sharing digital public goods, engaging talent, and pooling data sets in a manner that respects privacy in areas related to attaining the SDGs. So the Alliance will contribute to accelerate the achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals in development countries by facilitating the discovery, development, use of, and investment in digital public goods. And the Alliance is guided by the Digital Public Goods Standards, which emphasizes the principle of do no harm and the Sustainable Development Goals when assessing nominees for inclusion on the Digital Public Goods platform. Another assessment criteria are that the project or the tool has an open source and approved open license, and that it's adoptable, meaning that it can be integrated into other systems and tools. And for instance, the weather information from the app that I mentioned is also being integrated in several other tools. For instance, an app Norwegian farmers are using to forecast the outbreak of pests. So far, the Alliance has selected 4 focus areas: education, early grade reading, financial inclusion, digital health, and climate change adaptation. And on climate change adaptation, a community of practice is currently under development. This is a group of experts that work to identify, assess, and advance potential high-impact digital public goods for climate change adaptation. And the group has decided to include tools and projects covering the entire value chain of weather and climate services, from observations to end-user contextual application or tailoring, for the food security, agriculture, climate change adaptation, and disaster risk reduction sector. And projects and tools have so far been nominated by the members of the community of practice or through our website. The proposed projects are then vetted to see if they meet the criteria I mentioned above. Examples of tools that are being vetted is, for instance, the FAO's Fall Army Worm Monitoring and Early Warning System, the Met Norway Open Weather Data Service that I told you about, and Think Hazard by GFDRR and World Bank. And there are several others as well. So our aim is to identify high value projects for development countries around which we can leverage donor alignment and enhanced country engagement. And we will produce a list of recommended digital public goods and then work to identify mechanisms to additionally support these projects. So far, the community of practice consists of representatives from WMO, FAO, WFP, UNEP, the World Bank, Met Norway, and NORAD. And we are open to including new members, so please feel free to contact me or register your interest at the website, digitalpublicgoods.net. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Astrid, and thank you for sharing information on this great initiative. I really encourage everybody to connect to Astrid, to learn more about the platform and to learn more about how it can really bring that element of partnership and alignment that we discussed before. So thank you so much, Astrid. Our next panelist is Ram Mahadvan, is the president and CEO of Farmer Service Platform at Olam. Ram has 25 years of experience within Olam as a successful founder and entrepreneur within the company. And he's also been recently appointed CEO of Jaiva, which is an agtech venture which is being incubated in Indonesia. Ram, thank you so much for joining us, and I invite you to turn your camera on and your microphone on. It will be really sorry. It will be. Thank you. It will be really great to hear from you about your experience at Olam, and especially whether you could tell us a little bit about how Olam's farmer service platform works and how it leverages technology to reach smallholders, and how does this platform really align with Olam's goal of reimagining global agriculture and food systems?
Thank you. So Olam is an agribusiness company. We've been in direct sourcing on first mile from millions of smallholder farmers across Asia, Africa, and South America in over 60 countries for a very long time. Close to 30 years, we've been in the first mile part of the sourcing operations. So in this venture, what we are trying to do is to put together and leverage what various technologies that are available today to solve this problem of first mile delivery of services to the farmers on a more holistic basis. It's kind of ambitious. It touches upon many of the issues that other panelists and some of the participants had raised, which is how do you solve for at the first mile delivery to these smallholder farmers at scale? How do you deliver personalized advisory and other solutions, again at scale? And how do you really solve for the interrelated complexity of the needs that each of these smallholder farmers have in these emerging markets? Now, what we are, of course, we are building out, and we are just in the throes of launching this platform in Indonesia. What we are attempting, a slightly ambitious endeavor, is to try and solve all of this together, which is to have 4 components: and personalized advisory, which is personalized, contextualized, and really delivering to a farmer as to what is the next best action that the farmer can take on a particular day, which is yield defining for that farmer. So we want to bring it down in a human-centric way, not only design in an interface, but also communicate it in a language that the farmer can act upon in an actionable way. This, of course, needs a lot of back-end work around processing weather information, the data around what is happening in the particular farm, in the particular crop, the data sowing, and so on and so forth, and being able to provide farmer-specific advisory. This platform also will provide inputs on credit and buy offtake. So what we are trying to do is what various other players have tried to do on a coalition basis. What we are trying to do is a single stop shop for the farmer. And that allows us to be able to integrate the needs of the farmer. It's again a farmer-centric platform, integrate the needs of the farmer, and therefore offer a barter opportunity for the farmer can buy the inputs on credit and sell the offtake to us, and we provide the interface and provide advice on a personalized next best action kind of advice that the farmer can journey with us. Now we want to deliver this both with an offline and an online system. So it'll be digitally enabled with the farmer both on an offline, online basis that they can interact, including feature phone facilities. But it will have a field force of Jiva friends who operate like a relationship manager to these farmers. And they will have a set number of farmers that they handhold the farmer in making this digital divide. A whole lot of times, a farmer finds it easier to use a smartphone or other phones for social media, but to transact is very hard. So we want a mirrored technology tool available with these farmer friends that allows them to transact on behalf of the farmer, but ensuring security of data privacy, etc. And also execute the last mile or the first mile in delivery of services, delivery of inputs, pickup of the offtake on an integrated basis. That is our ambition. But we want to do it because of the complexity of the offering, we'll be doing it one crop at a time. So what we are doing is taking scale crop. Indonesia has 7 million farmers growing 30 million tons of corn. So we started with corn. And we will want to add crops one stage at a time as we roll out. That is our ambition, and that's what we are trying to build here. And we think that this, at its heart, if you build and we are able to scale this, and we've done a whole lot of pilots around this through Olam's own operations and in Jiva itself. And our ambition is to do it where we are able to address the needs of millions of farmers in each country. And if you're able to do that, then we truly deliver our Olam's core purpose of reimagining global agricultural systems. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ram. And really exciting venture and opportunity. I hear one element that I think is quite important is this idea of bundling and making sure that we have a whole suite of services that can be provided to the producers, and also the idea of having a mixture of in-person, that relationship management factor that we've heard is quite critical to make sure that these services are accessible.
It also makes it economically sustainable, because we have services like imports disintermediation, offtake disintermediation, first mile disintermediation. All of this makes it sustainable, a profit for purpose venture that pays for being able to provide that advisory that enhances yield, for which we don't intend to charge anything. So the farmer doesn't pay for any of this. If at all, we'll give back value to the farmer in kind and price.
Exactly, and that also addresses the point of having a strong business case for business, but also for producers, of why this matters to them. Thank you so much, Ram. This is great, and we'll come back to some questions later. I'd like to introduce our next panelist now. I'd like to introduce Gordon Nicoy, who's a business development manager for Ezoko. Gordon has been with Ezoko since 2013, where he started as a field deployment manager, and he has a long experience in delivering services to smallholder farmers. He even trained and delivered support to over 100,000 smallholders in his role in TechnoServe as part of a USAID-funded initiative. Gordon is also a farmer himself, so he will be able to give us perhaps a perspective from the end user of DCAS. So thank you so much, Gordon, for being with us. If I can ask you to put your camera on, I would like to ask you a little bit to tell us around the success of Ezoko, who's been able to really expand your services geographically and in terms of bundling. What do you think are some of the key elements that enabled this success and that you could translate to the whole issue of scaling digital advisory services?
Thank you very much, and thanks for the other panels on the program. Ezoko believe in giving the farmers exactly what they need to help them improve on their yield and improve on their livelihood. In view of that, we try to bring the bundle services to them. So that at Ezoko, you get the weather information, you get the market prices, you get the climate smart agriculture advisory service that will give you based on your location. And in this, I will say that one thing that I've put Ezoko where it is our ability to go in for the private-public partnership. So we partner with the other private sectors, we partner with other public sectors to bring the service to the doorstep of the farmer. It's not easy. If I tell you it's easy, no, it's not easy. Because as a private person, the private man is thinking of how much am I going to make in this service that you are going to deliver. The private sector is looking at how can I get the information to that person. The farmer is looking at, if I take this service, will it work? And you know, illiterate farmer who don't believe in technology will ask you, if you tell me it will rain today, are you God to tell me that it will rain? How can it rain? So bring all these things together, makes it a more holistic and unique product to make sure that the private man that you are bringing on board understands that this is not a cash down approach. It will take you some time before you can make your profit. And then bring in the public sector to look, we all need to get this thing going and we need to go. And also the most important channel from Ezoko is the telecom operators. Because in the rural areas where our farmers need this information most, there are no network. And if you want that farmer to get it, to make it, or to hear of it, then the telecom operator should put a network there. And we tell her, look, it doesn't make business sense to put a network in that area. What do you do? So in every now and then, you have to think and make sure that our private partnership programs is working and the capacity building of the farmer is also active. And day in and day out, you'll be increasing the numbers. Thank you very much. And I would say that has been the success of Ezoko. We try to bring partners together. We try to educate the farmers on the services, and we try to bring the bundle service to them. So at Ezoko, it's not going to be only weather, but it's going to be weather, it's going to be insurance, it's going to be financial inclusion, it's going to be climate smart agriculture, it's going to be market price, it's going to be market linkages. So at that bundle service, it's more like a one shop that you get everything and it keeps you moving.
Thank you so much, Gordon. And I hear again the theme of bundling and being able to answer the various needs of farmers. I think one element that has been quite important in Gordon's introduction, and that definitely can be reflected in what we found in our working group 3 work, is the need to build trust with producers that those services will support them, but also the understanding that there is capacity building behind that and how that is a longer term investment and a longer term commitment from their end. So I'm really glad that you raised this as the importance of building the business case for farmers as well as for businesses and public sector. So thank you so much, Gordon. Last but not least, I would really like to introduce our last panelist, Daniele Tricarico. Daniele is the head of Agritech program at the GSMA, and he brings together in this program mobile industry, agricultural stakeholders, innovators, and investors to really launch, improve, and scale commercially viable digital solution for smallholder farmers in Africa. No small feat. And Daniele, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Nicoletta.
I wanted to ask you about some insights from one of GSMA's latest report on digital agriculture. The report, the authors of the report touch upon some examples of really successful long-running services that have reached a degree of scale in digital advisory services. From the GSMA perspective and from your own experience, what would you say are the critical factors that have allowed for these services to be so successful?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the invitation, and it's great to be in this discussion today. We have recently launched this landscape or state of the sector report on digital agriculture called Digital Agriculture Maps, and it's really aggregating our learnings as a GSMA working on advisory services since 2009. But looking more broadly at digital agriculture, all the use cases that have emerged over the past few years, e-commerce, digital financial services, smart farming solutions, and also enterprise solutions. When it comes to scale, I would say it's been mentioned in this discussion before. We are seeing certainly a huge amount of innovation coming from the private sector. In particular, we talked about machine learning, AI, big data has been mentioned during this discussion. This innovation is what we refer to in the report in particular as innovation at the back end, no? That is really driving, empowering better data-driven services. However, I think one of the key messages that we have in the report, and it's really about scaling solutions, is that we need to work still on feature phones, on 2G channels. We need to be very aware of the last mile delivery. Farmers still are on 2G phones, right? Even today, still 45% of mobile connections in sub-Saharan Africa are on 2G. So these fundamental channels like USSD, SMS, voice, IVR, they're still the channels to deliver services. And of course, the element to consider here, and as it has been mentioned during this discussion, is HCD, human-centered design. We talk about it as inclusive design, really. No, it's the need, and there are documented lessons on doing effective on designing effective services through HCD. But really, we need to think about the needs of multiple users. As well. So we're not only designing for farmers, we're also designing for field officers, for agents. We're designing for the back office staff in agribusinesses. We've heard from Ram about the great work that organizations like Olam and other agribusinesses are doing in digitizing agricultural value chains. So it's not just about designing for the farmers, but also for the other intermediaries and actors that participate in value chains. And of course, when we talk about human-centered design, we think about also design around the needs of women. I would also mention people with disabilities. Disability is also an issue that we need to take into account. At the GSMA, we have a program that is called Assistive Tech. So we're doing a lot of work now as well on how we can include, what are the considerations in designing services to include people with disabilities as well. So having said that, this is really the starting point to have a scalable service. We have certainly seen in our experience that the direct-to-consumer model can work, the B2C model can work. If services are well designed, there's a well-defined value proposition, services can actually scale. In our experiences, we've been supporting mobile operators, developing these advisory services, and we have examples of services that have scaled up with over 10 million users. For example, a case of Telenor in Pakistan. Another example is Dialogue in Sri Lanka with a digital advisory with climate information, targeting farmers in that countries. They scaled up very, very nicely. They have a high percentage of active users in their user base. And of course, we are seeing, that it is possible to charge these services to farmers. The farmers are prepared to pay if there is good quality, good content, relevant content. But of course, you can also, and that's probably the best way to scale. You can offer services free to the farmers. The direct-to-consumer service and the freemium model has worked very well. But then it's a question really about extending the value proposition. There's a high degree of specialization in the sector, very highly specialized services, but really the value proposition need to be broad, and certainly bundling is the way to go. Or even further, we've seen the emergence now of real platforms, digital platforms. We think about the example of Safaricom with DigiFarm in Kenya, whereby really mobile operators, in that case Safaricom, are integrating with a number of agri-tech companies and other companies to offer a variety of services. So really, this is what we have learned so far. But I think my key message here is focus on inclusive design, focus on core channels, 2G channels. Of course, there are a growing number of farmers now on smartphones as well. So this is coming up, but focus really on feature phones and continue thinking about new channels such as smartphones, bundled proposition, and a differentiated revenue stream. So sometimes it can work to charge farmers. Sometimes you need to work with in monetizing, in finding other ways to monetizing services. You can implement freemium services or B2B, business to business solutions, whereby you can find different revenue streams for actors that are, for example, interested in analytics, in accessing anonymized farmer data, as the example of Ezoko. And the example of Ezoko is one case of this approach.
Thank you so much, Daniele, and you did such a great job summarizing your point. I don't need to, so thank you so much for your intervention. We now will move on to, we have a few questions coming into the chat. What I will do, like Katyusha did, I will assign some questions and then give you some time, and then we'll open up. I see there's a question for Stuart there around regional collaboration at regional level. So above the 3 elements and levels that you described, so farm, ecosystem, and macro level, what do you think about regional collaboration to fill critical data gaps, for example? So that would be one question for Stuart. Let me see, going down, there's also a question from Ram on whether you could expand a little bit more around how the business model is profitable if farmers don't need to pay. So really taking back to what Daniele just mentioned, how can we make those type of business model profitable based on the offer? We've also got a general question for all the panel, which I believe will be really difficult to answer, but it's around scalability. What do we really mean by scalable? It's a term we throw around a lot, but do the panelists have a view on what is really scalable, and can we really define it generally? A question for Gordon is whether Ezoko is mostly funded by international donors, or do you also partner with the government of Ghana? But I think Gordon have already answered that. Sorry, just going through here. There's a question around bundling. So it makes sense, but it also risks de-skilling farmers. So what about a more open-ended approach that encourages skilled application of climate information by farmers? Perhaps, Gordon, you could take that one. Let me see if there's anything else. Perhaps, Stuart, I can ask you to start with your answer and then Ram following.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, I think the definitely agree that filling critical data gaps through collaboration at the regional level is really important, even within countries though as well. I mean, I guess if we think about different scales, you know, there's some global data sets like the global forecast models, and those are driven by data sharing. You know, essentially between different countries sign up to share weather station data with one another, so that those global forecast models can be built. So, you know, finding the incentives for why different actors should and can and are incentivized to share data, I think is a important component. If we think regionally, there's some examples like Digital Earth Africa looking at, you know, satellite derived analytics, there's soil information services, there's early warning systems, and then there's, you know, the local level as well. So I think, yeah, trying to assess, you know, how to encourage different actors to share data when it could be beneficial to all, trying to break down some of those natural barriers that occur. Sometimes you won't be able to achieve that. There may be a proprietary reason or a competitive reason why actors may not share data. But I think increasingly, as we're seeing more machine learning and AI-based data-driven models, having enough training data for those models is critical to making those solutions relevant to a smallholder farmer at a specific location. So the more we can do to collaborate around sharing data would be great. And we're doing some of that with a project called Enabling Crop Analytics at Scale, where we're working with different actors to try to figure out how do we share crop yield data for training satellite-derived crop analytics. You know, setting up the incentives and the models for that, and what would be a sort of a brokering entity, you know, what would an institution look like that would maybe enable that. Just a couple of points before I finish on the other questions, Nicoletta, on scale. I actually asked that question, so I'm very interested in people's personal definition of scale. It's something we use all the time, so I'd love to hear people's perspective on that. And finally, on bundling, I think that's another area where definition is needed. You know, in one sense, bundling could be locking people into, you know, if it's a tightly bundled service versus a more loosely bundled service, like, you know, how do people think about that and define bundling?
Thank you, Stuart. And I encourage participants to kind of try and answer Stuart's question in the chat. And Ram, as you move on to maybe elaborating a little bit on the business model, perhaps you could also attempt and define scale from how Olam sees it.
Yeah, sure. I have tried to answer it in the chat box. Effectively, the source of income is going to be a combination of disintermediation on the input chain, supply chain, disintermediation of the offtake supply chain, but the other efficiencies that are drawn through route optimization, through digital data-based route optimization and quality loss reduction through that. So these are the sources that we have piloted and that we have run and seen that generates adequate margins in the system that allows us to give back to the farmer. To give an example, our intent is to be able to provide very close to interest-free or very nominal interest credit on inputs. So fundamentally alters the dynamics for the farmer. And that is the way we want to give back, is looking at potential microinsurance to reduce the risk around climate variability and, you know, seed germination, etc. And we think that there is enough inefficiencies in the system, in the first mile, last mile systems, that we can extract through digital energy. So that brings back to scale, and it is directly related to this point as well. We think all of this is possible if you are able to get only a certain density. So if you look at corn farmers in Indonesia, there are 7 million farmers spread across a fairly large geographic area. And what we are looking for is to be able to have a market share of, say, 15% of farmers in each province or regency, which gives us a density of corn farmers in an area that allows us to optimize routes, optimize transportation, optimize quality management. So that for us defines scale. At a national level, 15% would be about 1 million corn farmers. But we are not looking at it just at the national level, but the economics drivers and the efficiency drivers come when we have a certain geographic density of farmers in each area. That for us drives scale. So then that that 15, 20% replicates at whichever scale that we choose to operate on, at which we are able to execute our operations on.
Thank you so much, Ram. Thanks for your answer. I also would like to ask Astrid, perhaps to elaborate a little bit more on how the Digital Public Goods Alliance plans on scaling the uptake of principles related to public data. So how do you encourage the political buy-in, for example, of digital advisory services a public good?
Thank you for this question. It's a very good question, and it's complicated. It's the alliance is quite new, so we don't have a lot of experience yet to show to. But for instance, when it comes to weather and climate data, Norway or NORAD is advocating the use of open data and promoting open data, but we realize that this is a politically very difficult question. But I think we need to demonstrate how these digital public goods can be applied in different circumstances, and that it can contribute to sustainability for the different countries, and that we need to ensure that there is an ownership on country level, that this is meant to be an add-on to the existing services and not meant to, as an earlier speaker said, not meant to replace national capacity. It's just meant to strengthen the products that they are able to deliver. So I don't have a very good reply to that. And input is, as mentioned earlier, very, very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Astrid. And another good examples of why we need collaboration and alignment. Daniele, I wanted to ask you to perhaps reflect a little bit on a couple of things if there's time. There's a question specifically around how do you think that academics could better collaborate in terms of AI and machine learning based on the data, and then also whether you can elaborate a little bit more on human-centered design. What does this entail?
Yes. In terms of the collaboration with academia, there is a huge amount of big data. I'm talking from the mobile technology, mobile industry perspective. I think there is a lot of work that we can do in looking at the data that is available and what kind of use cases we can enable with big data applications. We have a program at the GSMA that is called that looks at big data applications for social good. For example, you can imagine, you can look at the call detail records the mobile operators have, anonymized data that can give you an idea of population movement. It's a really interesting application for climate as well, for climate use cases. Looking at the movement of populations in climate-related emergencies by analyzing the way the mobile network is being used. You can see peaks of usage in certain times, and the mobile industry has experience in this sector, for example, for early warning systems, and but there is much more to do, and to leverage these data sets. We are working actually closely with the academic community on another application that is big data related. So we are looking at network data. In particular, network signaling data, essentially at the opportunity to use the mobile network as a network of for rainfall monitoring, for weather observations. It's a technology that has been around for some time, but essentially by looking at the way that the spectrum behaves during rainfall, you can infer rainfall observations. So it's a huge potential. Because we know there is lack of ground truth data. So using the mobile network as a proxy for weather station, for weather stations, it's really important. This is our work on commercial micro links specifically. This is the type of technology that can allow you to have this kind of data. And we are working actually with a university, with University of Wageningen on this approach. So we are collaborating, and it's nascent, it's early days, but there is a huge potential to use this data for very relevant applications. The other question was on user-centric design. I can share our experience very briefly. It's always been at the core of the way we work and develop services. I think it was mentioned before. I think maybe something that I would like to reiterate on the importance of service design is stylization. And for stylization, we mean delivering content or developing content rather in a way that resonates with the user. So very often, climate advisory or even a simple weather forecast can be difficult for a farmer to be interpreted and to be understood. How can we work in a way that we can deliver this information in a way that is accessible and usable for farmers? So in a couple of services that we have supported as GSMA, we have actually developed narratives that resonate with local audiences. We've actually used soap operas. There is a service I mentioned before, Telenor Pakistan. The way the agronomic advisory is developed is around a soap opera style. There are characters that we have created based on user-centric design, and they are the characters that present the content through stories through the user. So it's actually an entertainment service for farmers. It's something that they enjoy listening to. There is also a radio show where the content is presented, and the advisory is given in this form that resonates very well. And we've seen active usage, being really developing as a result of the information being disseminated in such a way. So this is what we have been done, and we strive to continue doing as we work with our partners to develop climate advisory services.
Thank you so much, Daniele. Very good and interesting approaches to really reach the users in different ways. I think Gordon is having some technical issues, so I skipped the question I had planned, but I see as a last question for our panelists, open to all.
By God's grace, I'm back.
There's a point here made. Oh, you're back, Gordon. So please let me ask you a related question around how do you balance your different partners and donors for sustainable, long-term sustainable partnership? You talked about the importance of partnership to really support the scalability of your work. It will be really interesting to answer that.
So thank you very much, and sorry for going off, but I'm back. So what we believe in is revenue sharing. Every partner needs to be open and be clear of what he or she is going into. So if everybody is clear and he knows that this amount of resources which are coming, and my share of that resource is at this amount, and you are straight and open and frank and give everybody what is due him or her, you say that the partnership grows stronger and stronger. And one thing that we always do with our donor institutions is we make sure that when the donor brings us money to reach to farmers, we get to farmers in a diminishing manner. So for example, this year, a farmer will enjoy the service for free, 100% free. Next year, he will enjoy maybe 70% free, and he pays 25%. The following year, we reduce it to maybe 50%, he pays 50%. So at the end of the program, and at the end that the donor will not be there, the farmer will be able to pay for the service because he has enjoyed it, he has used it, he has seen the benefit of it. And at the end of the day, when that farmer is paying us, then we say that our program has been successful and the program is sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gordon, and thanks to all of our panelists. I believe we have run out of time for questions, and I appreciate all of the comments in the chat. I think it's very clear that elements like human-centric design, bundling, the importance of public-private partnership, but also the right definition when we talk about scalability, when we talk about impact, what do we really mean? There's a few comments there around the need to kind of build that capacity for farmers to actually implement the advice they receive through digital advisory services, which I think is a critical element. So thank you so much to all our panelists and the questions asked, and I pass on the word back to Tyler. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you, Nicoletta, and thank you, panelists. I'm sensing a lot of emerging commonalities and themes, as well as still a lot of questions, especially in the chat. So please, we'll be recording those, and then we'll be filtering those back to some of the panelists as well. I would like to turn to Claude for the last Mentimeter question. Claude?
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Yeah, so I think this kind of sums up most of the conversation we've had by the panelists. We've had a lot of, input from different roles, different perspectives. So I think it would be good to just quickly, to get some ideas or suggestions from the audience, those that are still online, on how do we accelerate resilience using these digital tools for farmers and developing countries. Yeah, good one. For those who joined late, you just need to access the link. It's on the screen, and then you use the code. And as you type, it is projected on the screen. Yeah, I can see people pointing at governments, government ownership, government as well. So just quickly share examples to inform and inspire stakeholders. Yeah. I don't know if people are still typing or whether they are not yet there. I can only see 3 on the screen. Yeah, transparent PPPs, and that's another one. Yes, community of practice. Yes, that's a good one. I think there's already a couple of out there. Probably one should analyze, what's going on. Yeah, local solutions, local contexts. Yeah. Speaking of human-centered design, where you provide valuable information. Emma, do you want to scroll? Yeah, inclusion, definitely. And for those interested in finding out more about inclusion, look out for the upcoming investment blueprint, where we've kind of framed a number of principles that would allow to build inclusive, sustainable, but also, user-centered digital advisory services, finance again, and PPP. Investment from other sources, VC, impact investment. I think we're seeing that with a number of agri-tech startup in a couple of regions. Yeah, social enterprise, yes. Pilots, I think we've had lots of pilots, and impact assessment, yes. But I think there's been a couple of pilots, and if you look at the work of the likes of CTA, where they've been supporting youth-led enterprises. Yeah, I think that's all. I think I could sense many people asking for government ownership, for diversified investment, but also to be more inclusive. PPP as well. Country level digital agriculture stock. Yeah. So Tyler, I think I'll hand it over to you. These are quite rich, and hopefully, we, as I said earlier, we'll be able to circulate the synthesis of what we've been able to capture. Yeah, over to you, Tyler. Thanks everyone for the great thoughts, and some have actually expanded, which is quite interesting.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Claude. And that makes one of my last jobs a lot easier with the questions coming in, because I think that there's been a lot of summarization of some common themes that have been across the different panels. But I wanted to touch on a couple of things that have emerged for me. So Emma, if you could move to the next slide, please. Great. So one of the things that I'm hearing, and I've heard this from Ram, I think Gordon touched upon it, and several other people have mentioned it, is just integration, and in terms of bundling, but also in terms of integrating with different partners on different scales. And the term that kept on coming up, and I heard this from David, I heard this from Stuart, is this idea of healthy ecosystems with diverse and complementary partners. I was also hearing from not only from the panelists, but also the speaker or the people entering in the chat, that we shouldn't be trying to replace existing face-to-face services, but really using digital advisory services to complement what's already existent. In addition to some, I think, recommendations of approach, there's also still a lot of questions. So in terms of scale, is this relevant for reach? Is it relevant for impact? Are people mentioning scale or defining scale in different ways depending on what types of actor they are? A lot of questions about building a wide range of consensus, as well as this need for open quality data in order to reach scale. And I think one of the key things that I've taken away is that although this is a rapidly growing field and it's rapidly diversifying, there's a lot going on. John Mundi, the first panelist, had said at the very beginning that this is still nascent. This is still, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of things happening simultaneously. And I think that points at one of the responses in one of the Mentimeter questions is that we need to solidify a community of practice and really land on some principles and standards. And so those are some of my key takeaways for today, but I would love to hear from everyone else if they have any other key emerging themes that they would like to put in the chat. That would be great. Next slide, please, Emma. Oh, can you go back one, actually? Thank you. So we only have a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to come full circle and just give a little bit of an update on where the blueprint, the investment blueprint that we've been mentioning throughout the webinar, where that is. We are currently finalizing the blueprint. We're just wrapping up some analytical pieces. We are simultaneously working with the Commission, the Global Commission on Adaptation, to mobilize donor support for scaling digital climate advisory services and working to secure further political buy-in and leadership in this space. This is all going to lead up to the Climate Adaptation Summit, or CAS, which will occur in late January. I think the dates are there. Yep, January 25th and 26th. And work from the blueprint will be shared during that summit. Post-summit, we will be exploring further analysis and follow through on blueprint recommendations. I think although we've accomplished a lot in what we've done with analysis, it's also just pointed at a lot more questions that need answers. And so we are welcoming further engagement from those on this call and look to further co-create next steps in this process. Next slide, please. I would like to thank everyone on the call, all the panelists, all the moderators, all those participating in the chat, everyone else in the audience. But I would especially like to thank some of the people behind the scenes. That's Emma Frank and Emma Perlstone that have been running the show, as well as Tessa Belloni, who wasn't here today, but she was wonderful in helping to put together some of these slides. And then finally, next slide, please. As I promised, I would share some information on Adaptation Week. As I mentioned, this was the first event in Adaptation Week. There will be events every day with different themes. Today was agriculture. We'll be doing things in finance, nature-based solutions, water, city, locally led action. And so I encourage you to participate in some of those as well. Next slide, please. And if you have any questions about the Digital Advisory Blueprint, about any of the things that the panelists have said, or about Adaptation Week, I encourage you to reach out to me. Again, my name is Tyler Ferdinand with the World Resources Institute, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you, everyone.